"Security, get this man out of my boardroom." 27 executives burst into laughter as two guards grabbed the black man by the arms. The vice president sneered. "A temporary records clerk doesn't belong in meetings like this." Marcus Reed didn't argue. He simply closed the black folder in his hands and quietly looked around the room, memorizing every face that had laughed at him. What none of them realized was that Marcus hadn't come to the company looking for a job. He had come to investigate it. And every insult, every order, every humiliating word they had thrown at him had just become evidence. Within 24 hours, the people ordering security to remove him would be the ones being escorted out in handcuffs. If you love stories where dignity defeats prejudice and the truth always finds its way to the light, subscribe now and stay with us until the very end. This story is only getting started. The black man was dismissed as unqualified, but he was the company's internal investigator. Security, remove this man before he embarrasses himself any further. The command struck the conference room with the clean, cold sound of a judge's gavel. 27 executives sat around a polished walnut table on the 42nd floor of Vantage Meridian Technologies. Beyond the glass walls, Chicago had disappeared beneath a gray November storm. Rain crawled down the windows, stretching the city lights into trembling silver lines. At the far end of the room stood a black man in a modest charcoal suit. His name was Marcus Reed. His jacket was clean but old enough to shine faintly at the elbows. His shoes had been polished that morning, though the leather was creased from years of train platforms, hospital corridors, and city sidewalks. He carried no expensive briefcase. Only a thin black folder rested beneath his arm. Two security officers waited behind him. Across the table, Vice President of Operations Richard Halston leaned back in his chair. His silver cuff links caught the ceiling light whenever he moved his wrists. He looked Marcus up and down with the expression of a man inspecting a stain on a white carpet. "You entered a closed executive meeting," Richard said. "You interrupted a multi-million-dollar procurement review, and now you expect us to believe you understand corporate compliance." Marcus did not raise his voice. "I asked why the East Harbor contracts were divided among 3 vendors registered to the same address." A few executives shifted in their chairs. Richard smiled without warmth. "That is exactly the problem. You don't understand how large companies operate." Marcus glanced toward the digital screen behind him. 3 supplier names appeared beside payment figures totaling nearly $18 million. Calder Industrial Solutions, Northline Systems Group, Ashford Logistics Consulting. Different companies, different invoices. The same mailing address above a dry cleaner in Indiana. Marcus had checked it twice. "The companies share directors," he said. "They were incorporated within 11 days of one another. Their payment approvals came from the same office, and all 3 invoices were divided just below the threshold requiring independent board review." Richard's smile disappeared. "You were hired as a temporary records assistant." "Yes. You sort archived files. That is one of my assigned responsibilities. And yet you walk into my meeting pretending to be an auditor." A few people laughed. Not loudly. It was the kind of laughter people used when they wanted a powerful man to know they stood safely on his side. Marcus felt the familiar heat move beneath his collar. He had known that heat since he was 14, when a store manager followed him through 3 aisles while white customers shopped freely. He had known it in college, when a professor praised his paper and then asked whether someone had helped him write it. He had known it during job interviews when men with thinner resumes were called promising while he was described as surprisingly articulate. He had learned not to let the heat reach his face. Richard tapped one finger against the table. "You have no MBA, no executive title, no recognized certification listed in your employee file." Marcus held his gaze. "Qualifications are not always printed on the badge someone gives you." The room went still. Richard's cheeks tightened. "People like you always say that." Marcus heard the words clearly. So did everyone else. No one objected. At the side of the table, Chief Financial Officer Elaine Porter lowered her eyes toward her notebook. General Counsel Stephen Cole pretended to examine the presentation screen. 2 junior analysts stared at their hands. Silence had chosen its side. Richard stood. "People like you," he repeated, confuse access with authority. "You are in this building because we allowed you to be here. That does not make you qualified to question the people who built it." Marcus's fingers tightened around the folder. Not from fear. From restraint. He could have opened it. He could have revealed the board authorization, his investigator credentials, the encrypted evidence, and the surveillance order that had quietly followed Richard for weeks. He could have ended the performance in seconds. Instead, Marcus studied every face around the table. The amused ones, the uncomfortable ones, the frightened ones, the ones already calculating how far they would need to distance themselves from Richard if the situation turned dangerous. Marcus had spent 6 weeks watching those faces. Today, they were telling him more than any spreadsheet could. He closed the folder. "You're right about one thing," Marcus said quietly. "Being allowed into a building doesn't mean a person belongs there." Richard gave a satisfied nod. Then Marcus added, "Sometimes the people who belong least are sitting at the head of the table." The laughter died. Richard's palm struck the walnut surface. "Get him out." The security officers stepped forward. Marcus did not resist. As they escorted him through the glass doors, he passed beneath the company's silver slogan mounted on the wall. Integrity through innovation. His reflection moved across the polished letters. For 1 second, the word integrity passed directly over his face. Then the elevator doors closed. At 5:40 every morning, Marcus Reed woke before his alarm. Not because he was disciplined, though he was. Because his mother's oxygen machine changed rhythm just before dawn. The machine sat beside a narrow hospital bed in the living room of the apartment they shared on the south side. Its steady mechanical breath filled the darkness. Pull, release, pull, release. Marcus would lie still for a few seconds, listening. Only after he was certain his mother was breathing comfortably would he rise. The morning before the conference room confrontation, the sky outside the kitchen window had been the color of old steel. He filled the kettle, measured his mother's medication, and warmed oatmeal with cinnamon because plain oatmeal made her lose her appetite. By 6, Loretta Reed was awake. She had once been a public school librarian with a voice strong enough to quiet an entire room of restless children. Illness had reduced that voice to a soft rasp, but it had not touched her ability to see through her son. "You didn't sleep," she said. "I slept. You closed your eyes. That's not always the same thing." Marcus smiled and adjusted the blanket over her knees. "You want blueberries?" "I want the truth. They cost more." She gave him a tired look. Marcus placed the bowl on the tray in front of her. "I have an important day." "You've had an important 6 weeks." He paused. Loretta was one of only 3 people who knew why Marcus had accepted a temporary records position at Vantage Meridian. To the company, he was Marcus Reed, 41, overqualified for clerical work but desperate after a long period of caring for a sick parent. That part was true. The rest was not in the employee file. For 12 years, Marcus had worked as a forensic investigator for the Office of Corporate Accountability, a private regulatory body retained by pension funds, investors, and federal agencies. He specialized in financial misconduct hidden behind ordinary paperwork, inflated contracts, false vendors, kickback schemes, internal bribery, and retaliation against whistleblowers. He was good at following money, better at following fear. 3 months earlier, Vantage Meridian's board had received an anonymous letter alleging that senior executives were diverting company funds through shell vendors connected to the East Harbor project. 2 outside audits had found nothing. That concerned the board more than if the auditors had found obvious theft. When fraud survived 2 audits, it usually meant the fraud controlled the auditors. Marcus had been brought in secretly by board chairwoman Margaret Weller. Not through human resources. Not through legal. He reported only to her and to a sealed committee of 3 independent directors. His assignment was simple to describe and difficult to execute. Enter the company at the lowest visible level. Watch who ignored him. Watch who feared him. Find the money. Marcus had chosen the records department because powerful people often forgot that paperwork had a memory. Loretta lifted a spoonful of oatmeal, but did not eat. "You're taking too much of it inside," she said. "I know why I'm there. Knowing why you stand in the rain doesn't keep you dry." A bus sighed at the corner below. Tires moved through wet pavement. Somewhere in the building, a baby cried and was quieted. "I need them to believe I'm harmless," Marcus said. His mother looked at him over the rim of her glasses. "Harmless and powerless are not the same." "No. Make sure you remember that before they convince you otherwise." Marcus reached across the tray and squeezed her hand. Her fingers were thin but warm. Behind her stood a framed photograph of Marcus at age 10, wearing an oversized tie at his elementary school awards ceremony. Loretta had spent 2 weeks grocery money buying that tie because he had been chosen to read an essay about justice. The essay ended with a sentence she still remembered. A fair person does what is right even when nobody important is watching. Marcus had believed it then. He still did. Before leaving, he checked the oxygen tank, placed emergency numbers beside the phone, and packed 2 peanut butter sandwiches into a paper bag. At the door, Loretta called after him. "Marcus." He turned. "Don't let their cruelty teach you cruelty." He nodded and stepped into the cold morning. On the first floor, his neighbor, Mrs. Washington, struggled with 2 grocery bags even though the nearest store had not yet opened. "Where have you been?" Marcus asked. 24-hour market. You're supposed to call me when you need groceries. You already have a mother. And you already ignore instructions." He carried the bags upstairs for her, placed the milk in the refrigerator, and tightened the loose screw on her kitchen cabinet. Mrs. Washington watched him work. "That company paying you enough to fix everybody's house?" "No." "Then stop doing good work for free." Marcus smiled. "My father used to say the same thing." "And did he listen?" "Never." "Then I see where you get it." By the time Marcus reached the train platform, the city was beginning to wake. Steam lifted from a street vent. A sanitation truck groaned through the intersection. Commuters stood beneath the shelter, their faces lit blue by their phones. Marcus saw a teenage boy in a school uniform searching his pockets beside the ticket machine. "You short?" Marcus asked. The boy nodded reluctantly. Marcus tapped his transit card twice. The boy stepped through the gate. "Thank you, sir. Get to school." On the train, Marcus stood sewing. Older man could take the last empty seat. He spent the ride studying a folded spreadsheet while the carriage rocked beneath him. At the next stop, a woman in a red coat glanced at his paper. "Studying for a class?" "Something like that." "You going back to school?" Marcus looked at the rows of financial codes. In a way, Vantage Meridian's lobby smelled of polished stone and expensive coffee. The ceiling rose 4 stories above the security desk. Employees crossed the marble floor beneath a sculpture made of steel rings, each one engraved with words such as vision, integrity, and courage. Marcus had been in the building 11 minutes when he endured the first humiliation of the day. He approached the executive elevators carrying a sealed archive box requested by legal. A white security supervisor stepped in front of him. "Deliveries use the service entrance." "I'm not making a delivery." The man looked at the box and then at Marcus's suit. "Courier badges need to be visible." Marcus turned his temporary employee badge around. The supervisor studied it. "Records department?" "Yes." "Then use the freight elevator." "My access instructions say this box goes directly to 40. Freight elevator." 3 white interns walked past Marcus and entered the executive elevator without showing their badges. Marcus watched the doors close behind them. The security supervisor folded his arms. "Problem?" "No." Marcus carried the box down a long hallway to the freight elevator. Inside, the air smelled of cardboard and cleaning chemicals. A custodian named Henry Bell stood beside a cart filled with folded towels. Henry was 62, with gray hair and a knee that bothered him whenever it rained. "They sent you back here again?" he asked. Marcus nodded. "You know those interns don't even work here full-time." "I know." Henry pressed the button for 40. "My daughter says I should report things like that." "Why don't you?" Henry looked at the floor numbers. "Because complaints have names attached to them, even when they promise they don't." Marcus remembered the sentence. At the 40th floor, Henry helped him lift the archive box onto a cart. "You ever get tired of being calm?" Henry asked. "Every day." "What do you do with it?" "The anger." Henry nodded. Marcus pushed the cart toward the legal department. "I try to make sure it works for me instead of the other way around." Richard Halston had spent 23 years making himself necessary. Necessary men were rarely questioned. He had joined Vantage Meridian when the company occupied 2 rented floors and manufactured industrial sensors for regional factories. Now it operated in 11 countries, held government infrastructure contracts, and displayed its name across a glass tower near the Chicago River. Richard told people he had helped build that tower. In private, he behaved as though he owned every person inside it. He arrived each morning in a black sedan at 8:15. Lobby guards straightened before he entered. Assistants learned to recognize his mood by how quickly he removed his gloves. He liked offices cold, coffee hot, and employees afraid enough to anticipate his needs. Richard had not always been cruel. The files Marcus obtained showed that he had grown up above his father's hardware store in Ohio. He had earned scholarships, worked nights, and risen through the company by understanding machines better than anyone around him. 20 years earlier, employees described him as relentless but fair. Then success changed the language around him. Relentless became brilliant. Controlling became visionary. Fear became respect. No one told Richard when confidence turned into contempt because people who challenged him stopped receiving promotions. At executive meetings, he did not merely interrupt people. He erased them. When a junior analyst presented a successful cost-saving model, Richard summarized it as his own idea before she finished speaking. When a black department manager challenged an unrealistic deadline, Richard called him aggressive. When a white manager made the same argument the following week, Richard described him as decisive. Most employees noticed. Few spoke. CEO Daniel Whitmore was intelligent, polished, and increasingly absent. His wife had died the previous year, leaving him to raise a teenage daughter while managing a company strained by rapid expansion. Richard made himself indispensable during Daniel's grief. He filtered reports before they reached him. He reassigned employees who asked the wrong questions. He rewarded managers who signed quickly. When problems appeared, they were always someone else's failure. The East Harbor project was Richard's greatest achievement, or so the company believed. It involved building an automated shipping and energy monitoring network across 3 port facilities. The contract was worth hundreds of millions. Investors praised it. Business magazines photographed Richard beside cranes and steel beams beneath the headline, "The Man Modernizing American Industry." But the project was bleeding money. Invoices doubled without explanation. Equipment arrived late or failed inspection. Consultants billed thousands of hours for work no one could verify. Marcus discovered the pattern during his 3rd week in the records room. A set of purchase orders had been archived under the wrong project code. That could have been an ordinary mistake, except all 12 had been approved on Sundays. The signatures belonged to Richard Halston. Marcus followed the vendor registrations. Calder Industrial Solutions was owned by a holding company. The holding company was controlled by a trust. The trust's legal representative was Martin Vale, Richard's brother-in-law. Northline Systems used the same accountant. Ashford Logistics had no visible employees, no warehouse, and no operating telephone number. $18 million had passed through the 3 companies in 14 months. Marcus suspected more. The obstacle was proof. A financial pattern could trigger suspicion, but he needed evidence that Richard knowingly controlled the scheme. He needed messages, altered approvals, or testimony from someone inside the operation. That person appeared unexpectedly. Her name was Lena Ortiz. She worked in accounts payable and ate lunch alone beside the service elevators. She was 32, careful, and always carried 2 phones, one personal, one issued by the company. Marcus first noticed her when a stack of invoices slipped from her hands. He helped gather the papers. She thanked him without looking directly at his face. One invoice showed a transfer of $740,000 to Northline for emergency systems consultation. The approval box was blank. Missing a signature, Marcus said. Lena snatched the page from him. "It gets added later." After payment? Her eyes met his. Fear arrived before her answer. "You should forget you saw it." Marcus lowered his voice. "Is someone forcing you to process these?" She looked toward the security camera above the elevator. Then she walked away. That afternoon, Marcus ate his peanut butter sandwich in the basement break room. Henry sat across from him with soup in a plastic container. "You ever notice executives don't bring lunch?" Henry asked. "They eat upstairs." "No, I mean they never carry it. Food just appears around them." Marcus smiled. Henry pointed his spoon toward him. "That Halston man made a secretary cry this morning." "What happened?" "She booked his car for 8:15 instead of 8:10. Marcus looked toward the break room door. "Did anyone say anything?" Henry laughed bitterly. "In this building? People only discover courage after somebody else gets punished first." A young receptionist named Jasmine entered with a vending machine coffee. She had worked at Vantage Meridian for 7 months and had already been warned twice that her natural hair was not polished enough for executive reception. She sat beside them. "Mr. Reed, can you look at my resume sometime?" "You planning to leave?" "I'm planning not to stay forever." Marcus nodded. "Bring it tomorrow." "You charge?" "1 coffee." "This coffee." "Not that coffee." For 4 days, Lena avoided Marcus. On Friday evening, he found a yellow envelope inside his locker. No name, no note, only a flash drive wrapped in a paper towel. He did not open it at work. That night, after his mother fell asleep, Marcus used an isolated laptop. The drive contained copies of invoices, email fragments, and payment schedules. One message had been sent from Richard to Lena at 2:13 in the morning. Approve them under emergency authority. Do not route through coal. Delete this after processing. Another message read, if finance asks, East Harbor approve the adjustment. They don't need to know who owns Northline. Marcus leaned back in his chair. Outside, rain tapped the fire escape. The final file was an audio recording. Richard's voice filled the small kitchen. People see what their position allows them to see. Keep Reed in archives. He's useful there. Men like him are grateful just to have a badge. Marcus stopped the recording. For a moment, the refrigerator's hum seemed painfully loud. What hurt was not Richard's contempt. It was the laughter following it. Several voices. Managers. People who greeted Marcus each morning. People who watched him carry boxes while knowing the company was stealing from employees' pensions and investors. Loretta appeared in the doorway. You all right? Marcus closed the laptop halfway. Go back to bed. That wasn't my question. He hesitated, then played the recording. Loretta listened without changing expression. When it ended, she walked to the table and placed one hand on his shoulder. Do you believe him? Marcus looked up. Believe what? That your gratitude makes you less dangerous. Marcus let out a quiet breath. No good. The next morning, Marcus took Loretta to a clinic appointment before work. The waiting room smelled of disinfectant and burnt coffee. A television in the corner played a morning show no one watched. A nurse called Loretta's name and then looked at Marcus. Are you her driver? He's my son, Loretta said. The nurse blinked. I'm sorry. I assumed. You did, Loretta replied. Marcus placed a hand lightly on his mother's back. She glanced at him. See? You're not the only one practicing restraint. After the appointment, Marcus bought her a blueberry muffin from a street cart. You hate blueberries, he said. I like expensive truth. He laughed. At work, Richard passed Marcus in the lobby. Without slowing, he handed him an empty coffee cup. Trash. Marcus looked at the cup, then at Richard's back. He placed it in the nearest bin. Not because Richard had authority over him. Because the investigation was not finished. The second public humiliation came 2 days later. A catered lunch had been arranged outside the executive conference center. Marcus was delivering archived vendor records when Richard stepped backward and knocked a cup of coffee onto the marble floor. Brown liquid spread across the white stone. Richard looked down. Then he looked at Marcus. Clean that. Marcus remained still. I work in records. Richard's assistant glanced away. Several executives stopped to watch. Richard pointed toward the spill. You people are all support staff to me. The words entered the hallway like smoke. Marcus looked toward the nearest custodian closet. Henry stood inside it, holding a mop handle, his face rigid with humiliation he had not personally received. Marcus bent down. Not for Richard. He picked up the leather folder that had fallen beside the coffee and placed it safely on the table. Then he stood again. Someone could slip, Richard said. Yes. Then clean it. Marcus took several paper towels from a nearby station and placed them over the spill. A junior vice president laughed. You missed a spot. Marcus looked at him. The man's smile weakened. Marcus cleaned the floor slowly. He could feel dozens of eyes on his back. Richard adjusted his cufflinks. There. See. Everyone has a level where they're useful. Marcus rose, folded the wet towels inward, and threw them away. Some levels are easier to see than others, he said. Richard stepped closer. What does that mean? It means the floor was honest about being dirty. Henry lowered his head to hide a smile. Richard's face hardened. Marcus walked away before anger could expose more than evidence had already revealed. That evening, Jasmine found Marcus near the service elevator. I saw what happened. So did a lot of people. I'm sorry. You didn't spill the coffee. I didn't say anything. Marcus looked at her. She held out her resume. I keep thinking I should have. You were afraid. That doesn't make it right. No, she looked down. Will you still help me? Marcus took the resume. Yes. Why? Because your worst moment doesn't have to become your permanent character. The executive meeting had not been part of Marcus's original plan. Investigators were trained to wait until evidence formed a complete structure. A premature confrontation could frighten suspects, destroy records, or place witnesses in danger. But at 9:20 on Monday morning, Lena sent him a message from an unknown number. They're finalizing the harbor transfers today. Another $11.4 million. Richard knows someone is looking. He says everything gets wiped tonight. Marcus called Margaret Weller. No answer. He called the independent board counsel. Voicemail. The executive meeting had already begun. Marcus stood in the records room beneath fluorescent light, listening to the ventilation system rattle. He had two choices: preserve his cover and risk losing the evidence, or expose himself before the investigation was ready. $11 million would leave the company before noon. Employee retirement funds were tied to Vantage Meridian's declining value. Contractors had gone unpaid. Nearly 200 workers at an Ohio facility were being told layoffs were necessary because the company needed to reduce costs. Marcus had read their letters. A machinist named Leon Briggs had asked whether his health coverage would continue long enough for his daughter's surgery. Richard called the theft an operational adjustment. Marcus picked up the black folder and entered the elevator. At the 42nd floor, the executive assistant tried to stop him. This meeting is closed. $11 million is about to leave the company. Her expression changed, but only for a second. Then she saw his temporary badge. You need to return to your department. Marcus stepped past her. What happened next ended with Richard's command, the executive's laughter, and security holding Marcus by the arms. Human Resources occupied the 12th floor, where the carpet was softer and the language was designed to hide violence. No one was fired. Their employment was concluded. No one was punished for speaking. They were released for violating professional boundaries. No one was silenced. The company simply protected operational harmony. Marcus sat across from Human Resources Director Caroline Beckett, while rain pressed against the window behind her. A termination letter rested between them. Your temporary assignment is being ended effective immediately, Caroline said. For entering the meeting, for repeated violations of access protocol, insubordination, and unauthorized handling of sensitive information. Did anyone review what I brought them? That is not within the scope of this discussion. Marcus almost smiled. Corporate language could make cowardice sound procedural. Caroline pushed the letter closer. You'll receive payment through the end of the week. Security will collect your badge. I won't sign this. Your signature only acknowledges receipt. It also states that I misunderstood company records and made unsupported allegations. Caroline folded her hands. I'm trying to help you leave with a neutral reference. A neutral reference from people calling me unqualified is not help. Her gaze finally lifted. I don't agree with how Mr. Halston spoke to you. But you wrote his decision. I have responsibilities. So do I. The door opened. A security officer entered carrying a small cardboard box. Inside were Marcus's personal items, a notebook, his father's fountain pen, a framed photograph of Loretta, Jasmine's resume, and a paperback copy of The Souls of Black Folk. The officer reached for Marcus's badge. Marcus unclipped it and placed it on the table. The plastic rectangle made a quiet sound against the wood. Temporary records assistant. No title had ever told less truth. As Marcus walked through the office, employees pretended not to stare. Some looked guilty. Others looked relieved that punishment had chosen someone else. Near the elevators, Lena waited beside a copy machine. Her hands trembled around a stack of paper. I'm sorry, she whispered. Marcus did not stop walking. Keep yourself safe. They're deleting everything tonight. Not everything. Her eyes widened. Marcus entered the elevator. Just before the doors closed, he said, Go home early. The descent took less than a minute. It felt longer. In the lobby, the security supervisor who had directed Marcus to the freight elevator avoided looking at him. Henry stood beside his cart. He saw the cardboard box. What happened? They ended my assignment. Henry's jaw tightened. For telling the truth? For speaking above my level. Henry reached into his pocket and removed a small umbrella. Take this. You'll need it. I've worked here 17 years. I know where they keep more. Marcus took the umbrella. Henry held out his hand. Marcus shook it. You listen to my name, Henry said. That sounds small. But people here forget names on purpose. Marcus looked at him. I won't forget yours. Outside, rain struck the pavement in silver needles. Marcus opened Henry's umbrella and walked toward the train station carrying the box against his chest. He passed a cafe where two managers from the meeting sat beneath warm pendant lights. One noticed Marcus. He said something to the other. They both looked away. At the station entrance, Marcus's phone rang. It was Loretta. How did the important day go? They fired me. His mother was quiet. Did you do something wrong? No. Then they didn't take your work from you. They took the job. That's not what I said. Marcus closed his eyes. I'm tired, Mama. I know. I'm tired of proving I understand rooms that refuse to understand me. I know. I could have ended it today. But you didn't. Lena was still in the building. If I exposed everything, Richard might know she gave me the files. Loretta exhaled slowly. Then even while they were humiliating you, you were protecting someone. Across the street, a delivery driver held his jacket over an elderly woman while helping her into a taxi. Neither noticed the rain soaking his back. They did not make you small today, Loretta said. It felt small. Pain and truth are not always the same thing. The train approached with a metallic scream. I'll be home soon. I saved you some soup. You were supposed to eat it. I saved you some soup, she repeated. Marcus smiled despite himself. The doors opened. He stepped aboard carrying the box, the evidence, and the knowledge that the most dangerous part of the investigation was about to begin. That night, Vantage Meridian's tower remained lit long after midnight. Richard Halston stood beside the windows on the 38th floor while two information technology managers worked at a conference table. Every archive search connected to Reed, Richard said. Every access record. Every copied file. One manager cleared his throat. Deleting logs could create compliance issues. You're not deleting them. You're correcting irregular entries made by a terminated temporary employee. And the East Harbor emails? Retention cycle. They're less than a year old. Richard stepped closer. Do you enjoy your position here? Yes. Then stop asking questions whose answers you already understand. By 1:30, thousands of files had disappeared. At 2:05, Richard authorized the $11.4 million transfer. At 2:17, the funds reached Northline Systems. At 2:21, they moved to an offshore account. Richard poured himself a drink. He believed the danger had passed. Across the city, Marcus sat at his kitchen table beneath a weak yellow light. Loretta slept in the next room. The encrypted files Lena had provided were arranged across 3 monitors. Marcus documented every transaction, timestamp, and corporate connection. He worked without music. Only the refrigerator hummed. Pipes knocked inside the wall. His mother's oxygen machine kept breathing. At 3:10, Marcus received a secure message from Margaret Weller. I saw your missed calls. What happened? The transfer went through. Do you have proof? Marcus looked at the payment tracking window. 2 weeks earlier, under board authority, he had installed an external preservation mirror through a trusted systems contractor. Every deleted file had been copied outside the company network. Richard had erased the originals. He had also created proof of obstruction. Enough to act, Marcus wrote. We must protect the witness. At 4, Margaret convened the independent directors. At 5:15, outside counsel contacted federal investigators. At 6:30, a judge approved an emergency order to preserve company systems and freeze connected accounts. Marcus closed the laptop at sunrise. Loretta stood in the doorway wrapped in a robe. You're still wearing yesterday's clothes. I lost track of time. She looked at the screens. Is it done? The evidence is secured. That's not what I asked. No, Marcus said. It isn't done. She sat beside him. On the screen was a photograph of Richard speaking at a charity banquet. Behind him, a banner read Leadership with Purpose. Loretta studied it. People build large walls around small souls. I keep thinking about the meeting, Marcus said. The words. The people who said nothing. Silence can be fear. It can also be permission. Yes. Morning light touched his father's fountain pen. Loretta followed his gaze. Your father used that pen to sign his first teaching contract. I know. He was told they already had enough black teachers. Marcus looked at her. You never told me that. He didn't want you to inherit every wound he carried. What did he do? He returned the next day with his qualifications, letters from parents, and the district's own hiring policy. Because he proved them wrong? No, Loretta's eyes settled on Marcus. Because he made it impossible for them to continue pretending they were right. At 7:02, his phone rang. Margaret Weller. The court order was approved, she said. Federal agents will enter Vantage Meridian at 9. And Lena? We have arranged protection. She left before the deletions began. Marcus released a breath. The board wants you present. Why? Because Daniel Whitmore still doesn't understand who you are. He had an opportunity to ask. He did, and he chose not to. Margaret was silent. Come anyway. Marcus looked at the cardboard box near the door. His temporary badge lay on top of Jasmine's resume. Morning light fell across the word temporary. I'll be there. At 8:58, Vantage Meridian's lobby was louder than Marcus had ever heard it. Federal investigators entered through the revolving doors carrying equipment cases and sealed documents. Uniformed officers secured the elevators. Employees gathered near the turnstiles, whispering into phones. No one laughed. Marcus walked in beside Margaret Weller and 3 attorneys from the independent board committee. He wore the same charcoal suit. The lobby guard stared at him. Mr. Reed. Marcus nodded. Recognition arrived slowly. Not recognition of Marcus as a person. Recognition of power. Marcus felt no satisfaction. Only sadness. Inside the conference room, Richard stood beside Daniel Whitmore and the company's legal team. Richard saw Marcus and laughed once. Then he noticed Margaret. His face changed. What is he doing here? Mr. Reed is here to present the findings of the internal investigation, Margaret said. What internal investigation? The one authorized by the board 11 weeks ago. Daniel stood slowly. Marcus. Mr. Reed is a senior forensic investigator retained through the Office of Corporate Accountability. His temporary assignment was an investigative cover. Richard's mouth opened. No sound came out. The same executives who had laughed the day before now stared at Marcus as though his body had transformed. But Marcus was unchanged. Same suit, same skin, same voice. Only their knowledge had changed. Richard recovered. He broke into confidential systems. Anything he found is compromised. Marcus placed the black folder on the table. I did not break into your systems. You stole documents. I reviewed records available through my assigned role, public filings, and material provided by a protected witness. Richard's eyes flickered. Last night, Marcus continued. You ordered the deletion of 4,812 files linked to East Harbor vendors. You have no proof. Marcus pressed a remote. The screen illuminated. A timeline appeared. 1:11 a.m. Administrative access initiated. 1:26 a.m. Archive deletion began. 2:05 a.m. Emergency transfer approved by Richard Halston. 2:21 a.m. Funds moved offshore. We installed an external preservation mirror under board authority, Marcus said. Every deleted file was copied before removal. Richard went pale. Marcus changed the screen. Corporate ownership charts connected Calder, Northline, and Ashford to shell companies, private trusts, and finally to Martin Vale. Martin Vale is your wife's brother, Marcus said. That proves nothing. His trust paid the mortgage on your Lake Geneva property. Richard's breathing became audible. Marcus opened an audio file. Richard's voice filled the room. Approve them under emergency authority. Do not route through coal. Delete this after processing. Another recording followed. Keep Reed in archives. Men like him are grateful just to have a badge. No one moved. Marcus stopped the recording. Richard's face twisted. You set me up. No, you came in under false pretenses. I came because employees were afraid to report what you were doing. You pretended to be unqualified. Marcus held his gaze. I never pretended that. The words landed quietly. Richard looked around the table. You all approved those payments. You signed the budgets. Elaine Porter spoke first. Based on reports you falsified. Richard turned toward Daniel. This company needed those contracts. I did what was necessary. You stole from it, Daniel said. I protected it. You stole from employees while telling us we couldn't afford their jobs. Richard's voice rose. Do you think any of this exists without me? I built these systems. I made the relationships. I carried this company while you disappeared into grief. Daniel flinched. Richard saw the wound. You needed me. Daniel's face became still. Yes, he said. And you used that. Marcus pressed the remote again. The screen changed. This time, the room saw footage from the executive hallway. Richard ordering Marcus to clean the spilled coffee. Executives laughing. The security supervisor directing Marcus away from the executive elevator while white interns entered freely. Human resources preparing the termination letter before interviewing a single witness. The executives around the table stared at themselves. Margaret spoke. Mr. Reed's investigation did not concern financial fraud alone. The board authorized a broader review of retaliation, discriminatory practices, and abuse of authority. Richard looked toward the camera mounted above the screen. You recorded me? Public and corporate common areas were monitored under legal authorization, Marcus said. Every act of retaliation became part of the investigation. General Counsel Stephen Cole turned pale. Margaret continued, Mr. Halston, you are not only facing allegations of fraud and obstruction. The evidence supports charges of witness intimidation, retaliation against protected employees, and conspiracy to destroy company records. 2 federal agents entered. One presented a warrant. Richard looked at Marcus with disbelief. You were carrying boxes. Marcus said nothing. You cleaned the floor. Silence. You let me speak to you like that. Marcus finally answered. I needed to know how you treated people you believed had no power. The agents took Richard's arms. As they led him away, his face changed. Contempt became fear. If this moment touched your heart, remember that dignity does not begin when powerful people recognize it. Marcus possessed dignity in the records room, in the rain, and on his knees cleaning coffee from the floor. Their recognition arrived late. His worth had not. Daniel asked Marcus to remain after the investigators left. The others filed out quietly. Some nodded toward Marcus. None apologized. I failed you, Daniel said. You failed more people than me. Yes. You were shown evidence. I was. And you chose comfort. Daniel looked toward the empty chair where Richard had Saturday. I told myself I was protecting the company. You were protecting the version of the company that required you not to question him. Daniel swallowed. You don't make this easy. An apology is not supposed to make the person giving it comfortable. The CEO nodded. I'm sorry, Marcus. He did not add an excuse. That mattered. Not enough to erase the harm. Enough to begin telling the truth about it. The board is suspending every executive who approved those contracts without review, Daniel said. We're freezing vendor payments and opening a restitution fund. What about the Ohio layoffs? Canceled. And Lena? Protected leave, legal representation, and full whistleblower protection. Henry Bell. Daniel blinked. The custodian? The man who has worked here 17 years and is still afraid to report discrimination. Daniel lowered his eyes. We'll review his complaint history. Not just his. Daniel nodded. There is something else. I want you to lead a new office of ethics and internal accountability. No. The answer came so quickly that Daniel blinked. You haven't heard the terms. I heard the position. You would report directly to the board. Full independence. You cannot repair a culture by hiring one black man after publicly humiliating him. Daniel absorbed the words. I know. Do you? I'm beginning to. Marcus looked toward the conference table. The people in this room knew something was wrong. Maybe not the details, but enough. They laughed because Richard laughed. They stayed silent because silence protected their salaries. What would you have me do? Review promotions. Pay disparities. Complaints buried by human resources. Find out why black employees are described as aggressive for behavior called leadership in others. Find out why temporary workers become invisible until someone needs blame. Ask why no one defended me before they knew my title. That will expose things people don't want exposed. That is what accountability does. And if the board resists, then your slogan about integrity is decoration. Daniel looked toward the silver letters in the hallway. Would you help us build the office if we commit to all of that? Marcus thought of Loretta, of Lena, of Henry's umbrella, of Jasmine's resume, of Leon Briggs's daughter. Not as a symbol. No, not alone. No, a team with protected authority. Independent reporting. Public progress reports. Restoration for retaliated employees. Outside review of discrimination complaints. Lena gets a position if she wants one. Henry receives back pay for every promotion denied without review. Jasmine's complaint about appearance standards is reopened. Daniel nodded. Agreed. You agreed too quickly. I'm trying not to repeat yesterday. For the first time, Marcus almost smiled. Daniel extended his hand. Marcus shook it. Not as forgiveness. Not yet. As an agreement to begin the work. Before Marcus left, Daniel spoke again. Why didn't you expose yourself during the meeting? You could have ended Richard's humiliation immediately. Lena was vulnerable. You protected her while we were firing you. Yes. I don't know whether I would have done that. Marcus picked up the folder. You can decide what kind of man you will be the next time doing right costs you something. Do you forgive me? Marcus considered the question. I believe you are sorry. That isn't the same thing. No, will it ever be? That depends on what you do after. The room stops watching. 6 months later, the records department looked different. The fluorescent lights had been replaced with warmer fixtures. Locked disposal bins stood beside every archive station. Access rules applied to executives and temporary employees alike. The most important change was invisible. People had begun asking questions aloud. The East Harbor investigation recovered more than $24 million. Richard Halston and 2 contractors were indicted on charges of wire fraud, conspiracy, obstruction, and retaliation. Several executives resigned. Others stayed and faced public review. The Ohio facility remained open. Leon Briggs's daughter received her surgery. Lena Ortiz joined the Office of Ethics and Internal Accountability as a senior compliance analyst. On her first day, Marcus placed a nameplate on her desk. She touched the engraved letters. "I spent years hoping nobody would notice me. Being unseen can feel safe," Marcus said, "until the wrong people depend on it." Henry Bell received a formal apology, a corrected pension calculation, and the supervisory promotion he had been denied 3 times. Jasmine moved from reception into communications after Marcus helped her prepare for the interview. On her final day at the front desk, she wore her natural hair in a wide crown of curls. No one asked her to change it. Marcus accepted the director's position only after the board approved every condition he requested. His office was on the 27th floor, not the 42nd. He chose it because employees could reach him without passing executive reception. The door remained open. One Friday afternoon, Loretta arrived in the lobby wearing a deep blue coat and the pearl earrings Marcus's father had given her 30 years earlier. Daniel Whitmore came downstairs to greet her. "Mrs. Reed," he said, "your son saved this company." Loretta's expression remained gentle. "No, Mr. Whitmore." He told the truth. The company had to decide whether it wanted saving. "I'm trying to make sure we keep deciding correctly." "Trying is useful," Loretta said. "Continuing is better." Marcus helped her stand. They rode the elevator to the 42nd floor. When the doors opened, the same executives who had once laughed at Marcus rose from their chairs. Not because he demanded it, because they did not know what else to do. Loretta looked at the long walnut table. "This is where they called you unqualified?" "Yes." She walked slowly toward Richard's former chair. Then she looked at her son. "Sit." Marcus shook his head. "That seat doesn't belong to me." "Why not?" "Because accountability shouldn't sit above everyone else." He pulled out a chair along the side of the table and placed another beside it for his mother. The executives sat only after Loretta did. No speech followed. No triumphant applause. Marcus placed his old temporary badge on the table. The plastic was scratched. One corner had begun to peel. Temporary records assistant. Beside it, he placed his current identification. Director of Ethics and Internal Accountability. Same name. Different titles. Same man. Marcus looked around the table. The truth brought by a janitor, an assistant, a driver, or a temporary worker does not become valuable only after you discover they have an impressive title. No one moved. People do not earn dignity through rank. Your position only determines whether you have the courage to recognize the dignity already standing in front of you. He opened the first report. The meeting began. Outside, winter sunlight spread across Chicago. It entered through the glass walls and warmed the scratched temporary badge. Hours later, when everyone had gone, Marcus returned to the conference room alone. The city had turned gold beneath the setting sun. He picked up the old badge. For a moment, he remembered the security officers at his arms. The cardboard box. The rain soaking his coat. His mother telling him that pain and truth were not always the same thing. Near the elevators, a young black maintenance worker stood on a ladder replacing a light panel. His uniform was marked with dust. Several executives approached, talking loudly, barely noticing him. Marcus held the elevator door. The maintenance worker climbed down. "Thank you, sir." Marcus looked at his name tag. "Have a good evening, Andre." The young man paused, surprised that someone had read his name. Then he smiled. "You too, Mr. Reed." They entered the elevator together. The doors closed slowly, reflecting 2 black men standing side by side, one wearing a maintenance uniform, the other carrying an executive folder. The light above them was warm. No one spoke. The elevator descended through the tower, past every floor where power had once mistaken silence for permission. And in that small, quiet space, justice made no sound at all.